the timeless past.
The expedition begins. The helicopter cut across the morning sky like a scalpel, its rotors scattering clouds of powdered snow into the thin mountain air. Below, the jagged spine of the Serrano Range stretched endlessly, its peaks capped with ice that glittered like steel under the sun. Dr. Elias Hart watched the landscape through the scratched window pane, his gloved hands folded over a notebook thick with scribbled calculations. For 20 years he had studied anomalies in Earth's magnetic field, chasing whispers of magnetic mountains, where compasses spun and aircraft vanished. This, he believed, was the most promising lead yet. Beside him sat Dr. Asha Raman, a geophysicist whose calm, measured voice often anchored their debates back to reason. Across from them, field technician Miguel Vargas adjusted his headset and gave their pilot a thumbs up. The three of them formed the core of the expedition, though a larger support crew had already established a base camp at the foot of Cerro Magnetico, the magnetic mountain the locals both feared and revered. Hart opened his notebook. A line from his research stared back at him. 1979 Flight 23 vanished from radar, no wreckage recovered. He had been a boy when it happened, captivated by the mystery of how a passenger plane could simply cease to exist. 4 decades later, he had traced fragments of declassified reports, eyewitness rumors, and satellite anomalies to this very mountain. The helicopter dipped lower, blades thrumming against sudden turbulence. Miguel frowned. "Instruments are going haywire," he muttered, tapping the altimeter. "Altitude's dropping, but no, wait, it's steady again. This doesn't make sense." "Magnetic interference," Hart said, his voice calm but triumphant. "We're entering the zone." Raman raised an eyebrow. "Or the mountain's weather is messing with your theories. Let's not leap to conclusions just yet." The pilot, a weathered man who had flown rescue missions in worse terrain, glanced back with a shadow of unease. "We'll set down at the lower ridge. I'm not pushing this bird any closer." They landed on a narrow plateau where the air bit sharp against their faces. The rest of the team was waiting. 2 local guides, Luis and Inez, and a trio of graduate students hauling crates of equipment. Tents flapped in the wind, secured against the stubborn rock. Luis, a wiry man with skin tanned by years of mountain light, approached them. "Dr. Hart," he greeted, though his eyes flicked nervously toward the looming peak. "You know the stories, yes? My grandfather used to say the mountain swallows steel. That's why climbers disappear. The earth pulls them in." Hart smiled faintly. "And your compass?" Luis held it out. The needle jittered wildly, refusing to settle. "This is why I don't come here often." "Perfect," Hart whispered, more to himself than anyone else. They spent the rest of the day setting up instruments. Magnetic flux sensors, gravimeters, and high-frequency scanners were arranged in a semicircle around the base camp. The air buzzed faintly, as though charged with static. Hart scribbled readings into his notebook, his excitement growing with each impossible number. By dusk, the mountain glowed with an eerie light. Sunset painted the snowfields in bruised violets and molten orange, but Cerro Magnetico remained strangely shadowed, as though the sun itself bent around it. Around the fire that night, the guides told stories. "Planes vanish," Inez said, her voice low. "Not just Flight 23, smaller aircraft too. Hunters lost, never found. Radios stop working. Sometimes you hear voices in the static, voices of those already gone." Raman sipped her tea. "Legends grow where science is scarce. Magnetic anomalies could explain the compass failures, the communication breakdowns." "But not the disappearances," Miguel added quietly. Hart looked at the flames, remembering a grainy photograph he'd uncovered in a government archive. A radar screen from 1979, a blip flickering over this very mountain, then vanishing. No debris, no black box, no distress call. "We'll find answers," he said firmly. "Answers science can measure." The wind howled through the camp, rattling the tents. In the distance, the mountain loomed like a silent sentinel, its dark flanks swallowing starlight. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Raman broke the silence. Tomorrow, we climb. The mountains pull. The morning broke gray and restless, clouds curling low over the Serrano range like smoke from some hidden fire. Asha Raman laced her boots in silence while Miguel checked batteries and radio equipment. The mountain, looming above them, seemed to wait. 3,000 meters to the upper ridge, Luis announced, hoisting his pack. After that, the path becomes unpredictable. Hart adjusted his climbing harness, notebook secured inside his jacket. His eyes gleamed with determination. Unpredictable is exactly what we're here for. The ascent began under a brittle sky. Snow crusted the rock in patches, crunching underfoot as the party wound along a narrow trail. Instruments in Miguel's pack beeped and hummed, feeding live data to the tablet strapped to his wrist. "Flux readings are climbing," he reported after an hour. "We're getting spikes every few seconds, like pulses." Raman frowned. "Natural magnetite deposits don't pulse, unless there's tectonic movement beneath the surface." "Or something else," Hart muttered. Luis, trudging at the front, called back over his shoulder. "The old ones say the mountain has a heart. A black heart of iron, beating beneath the stone." Miguel glanced uneasily at his instruments. Not far off. As they gained altitude, their equipment faltered. Compasses spun uselessly, radios crackled, then fell into static. The GPS showed them in two places at once, coordinates jumping between ridges miles apart. Raman tapped the screen, shaking her head. "This is worse than I expected." "Exactly," Hart said, his breath fogging the air. "These distortions, they're the key. Imagine what could happen to a plane flying directly overhead in a storm, with navigation wiped out." "Imagine it vanishing," Miguel muttered. They paused at a ledge to rest. Below them, the valley stretched wide, but the world seemed subtly skewed. The sun, half hidden by clouds, bent light strangely across the snowfields, casting shadows in impossible directions. Inez set her pack down and pulled a scarf tighter around her face. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. "The pull, as if the mountain is breathing, drawing us in." Hart glanced at her. "That's just fatigue." But privately he felt it too. A subtle pressure in his chest, as though an unseen hand tugged him forward. He scribbled a note. Localized gravitational anomaly. By midday, the party reached a steep slope of shattered stone. Miguel unpacked a portable magnetometer and drove its sensor spike into the ground. The display flickered, numbers jumping violently. "This isn't natural," he said. "It's not just magnetite. It's as if the field is oscillating." Raman crouched to study the screen. "Oscillating how?" "Like in waves, almost like time-lapse." Hart's heart raced. He thought of Flight 23, its last radar echo flickering like a candle before extinguishing. What if it hadn't been destroyed at all? What if it had slipped, drawn into some kind of temporal eddy? The theory seemed absurd, but the data pulsed on the screen as if agreeing. The climb grew harsher. Jagged rock gave way to ice fields, their surfaces fractured into deep blue crevasses. They roped together, moving carefully, each step deliberate. The wind carried strange undertones now, a low hum that rose and fell, as though the mountain itself were singing. Luis halted suddenly, pointing to the sky. Above them, a crow wheeled in circles. Then, without warning, it froze mid-flight. Wings spread wide, body suspended unnaturally in the air. The group stared in stunned silence. And then, just as suddenly, the bird snapped back into motion, flapping wildly as if nothing had happened. It veered away, shrieking into the distance. Raman's voice was a whisper. "Did we all see that?" "Yes," Hart breathed. His notebook shook in his hands as he scrawled, "Localized temporal distortion confirmed." Miguel swallowed hard. If that can happen to a bird, then it can happen to a plane, Hart finished. The realization struck them all at once. Flight 23 might not have been destroyed. It might still be here, somewhere within the folds of the mountain's magnetic heart, waiting to be found. They pressed on, though unease shadowed every step. By late afternoon, clouds thickened overhead, smothering the light. The trail narrowed, winding between cliffs of black stone veined with glittering metal. Their instruments beeped erratically, screens filling with noise. Finally, as the wind picked up and sleet began to fall, Luis raised a hand. "We stop here. No farther today." They pitched tents on a precarious ledge. The storm howled around them, battering canvas and bone alike. Inside, huddled in the glow of headlamps, they reviewed the day's data. "The pulses are strongest near the ridge," Miguel said, scrolling through readings. "Like something is buried deep beneath us, radiating out." "An iron deposit under tectonic stress," Raman suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or," Hart countered, "a magnetic singularity, a natural distortion of space-time." Silence followed his words. Outside, the wind keened through the rocks, a sound like voices crying in the dark. Hart closed his notebook. Tomorrow, he thought, they would climb higher. And tomorrow, perhaps, they would find what the mountain had hidden for 40 long years. Discovery. The storm broke overnight, leaving the morning crisp and strangely silent. Snow clung to the jagged cliffs like ash, and the mountain seemed to exhale slowly as if satisfied with its test. Hart emerged from his tent, breath misting in the cold, and looked up toward the ridge. The peak was half shrouded in mist, but he felt it. An unseen presence waiting. By mid-morning, the team was moving again. The climb grew more brutal, each step a negotiation with gravity and ice. Their ropes creaked under strain, and the silence between them deepened as if all words had frozen in the air. Raman checked her wrist display. "Readings are maxed out. Whatever's causing this anomaly, it's close." Miguel's voice trembled. "Closer than I want it to be." Luis led them around a sharp bend in the ridge, and then he stopped so abruptly that the rope snapped taut between him and the others. "What is it?" Hart called. Luis only pointed. The team scrambled forward one by one, and then they saw it. There, half buried in snow and rock, was the twisted skeleton of an aircraft. Its silver fuselage gleamed faintly under the thin light, as though time itself had polished it. The tail fin jutted upward at a crooked angle, still bearing the faded emblem of Trans-Andes Airlines. Raman inhaled sharply. "Dear God." "Flight 23. For a long moment, no one moved. The plane was impossibly intact, as though it had crashed yesterday, not 4 decades ago. Windows glinted unbroken, paint clung stubbornly to metal. Even the fabric of the seats, visible through a cracked section of fuselage, seemed untouched by years. Hart's chest tightened. This was the mystery that had haunted him since childhood, now spread across the mountainside like an accusation. They moved closer, crunching through snow until they stood before the plane's nose. It had crumpled against a wall of rock, yet there was no sign of fire, no scorched debris. Miguel pressed a hand to the metal. Cold. No rust. "This isn't right." "Preservation," Raman said faintly. "The conditions here, maybe the magnetic field interfered with normal oxidation." "Or maybe it interfered with more than that," Hart whispered. Luis crossed himself. "We should not be here," but Hart stepped forward. "We came here to be here." With effort, they pried open the forward hatch. The metal groaned in protest but yielded, releasing a rush of air that smelled faintly of dust and something sweeter. Something wrong. Inside, the cabin stretched before them, bathed in dim light through frosted windows. Rows of seats stood upright, cushions intact, safety cards still tucked into pockets. It was as if the passengers had simply stepped out minutes ago. Then Miguel's light caught movement. No, not movement. Shapes. Figures sat in the seats. dozens of them. The passengers. They were there, frozen in place, their bodies perfectly preserved. A woman's head rested against a window, her eyes closed as though asleep. A man clutched his briefcase against his chest. A child's small hand gripped the armrest, fingers curled but skin unmarked by time. Not corpses, not skeletons, people. Preserved as though 40 years had not passed at all. Raman covered her mouth with her hand. This is impossible. Hart's voice was hoarse. No. It's proof. They moved carefully down the aisle, light beams cutting through the frozen silence. Each passenger was locked in some final moment. Fear, calm, sleep, surprise. In the cockpit, the pilots sat with hands still on the controls. Dials and gauges looked frozen mid-spin, needles trembling in place as though time itself had paused in the instant of impact. Miguel's voice cracked. It's like they, never aged. Hart touched a control panel, fingers trembling. Localized time dilation. The mountain's field preserved them in a stasis bubble. 40 years outside, seconds inside. Raman shook her head. That would mean... She couldn't finish. Hart looked at her, eyes blazing. That they didn't die 40 years ago. They died yesterday. Or maybe... they aren't dead at all. Silence settled like ice. The still faces around them seemed to listen. Suddenly, a soft crackling filled the cabin. They froze. Miguel raised his radio, but it was dead. The sound came not from their gear, but from the plane itself, the overhead speakers. A burst of static, then a ghostly voice, warped and distant. Control, this is Flight 23. Experiencing turbulence, instruments failing. Request immediate assist. The recording dissolved into static, then silence. The team stood frozen, hearts pounding. It's looping, Raman whispered. A fragment trapped in the field, repeating. Hart's hands shook as he wrote furiously in his notebook. This is it. Proof of a temporal anomaly. We're standing in the eye of it. Miguel backed away, his face pale. We shouldn't be here. If this field trapped them, it could trap us too. But Hart's eyes never left the frozen pilot. We have to understand it. We must. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the fuselage. Snow whirled across the ridge, hissing against the metal skin of the plane. And in that moment, each of them felt it. The same tug as before, stronger now, as though the mountain's invisible heart was beating faster, pulling them inward. Clues in the metal. The wind outside keened through the fuselage, but inside the cabin, the air felt unnaturally still, heavy with decades of silence. Hart ran his fingers along the metal wall, his notebook pressed against his chest. Every detail mattered. The preservation of fabric, the static crackle of the radio, the impossible stasis of human bodies. Let's start collecting samples, he said, forcing his voice steady. Miguel hesitated. From them? No, Hart replied quickly. His gaze lingered on the frozen passengers before sliding away. Not yet. From the plane, from the structure. Raman knelt beside a fractured panel, pulling out a portable spectrometer. She scraped a sliver of metal into the sensor chamber, the device blinking as it analyzed. Aluminum alloy, she announced, just like standard aircraft hulls from the 70s, but... She squinted at the results. Trace magnetite, far higher than expected, as though the plane absorbed particles from the environment. Like it was steeped in the mountain's field, Hart said, scribbling notes. Miguel crouched near a seat, running a handheld magnetometer along its frame. The needle twitched erratically, registering surges that came and went in waves. This whole fuselage is magnetized, he muttered. But it's not stable. The readings fluctuate almost like a heartbeat, Inez whispered from the doorway. She had refused to step fully inside, her eyes fixed on the motionless passengers. The mountain's heart beating through the metal. Raman shot Hart a sharp look. Let's not romanticize this. We need hard data. They moved into the cockpit. The dials remained frozen mid-motion, their needles vibrating faintly as though trembling on the edge of release. Miguel attached a data cable, his tablet filling with noise. "Electromagnetic flux everywhere," he said. "I can't get a clean read. It's like the instruments are caught between two different states." Hart leaned closer to the pilot's seat, his breath fogging against the cold glass of a frozen altimeter. His mind raced. If the plane had been caught in a localized time distortion, then metal, circuitry, and even biological tissue could be preserved as if only seconds had passed inside. Rahman, studying the results, spoke slowly. If that's true, then the passengers didn't decay because decay never started. Time moved differently here. Hart's voice shook with excitement. Imagine it. 40 years to us, but only minutes to them. A bubble of warped chronology. But that would require energy on a scale. Rahman trailed off, frowning. It doesn't make sense. Natural magnetic anomalies can't do this. Unless they can, Hart countered. If the geology here creates oscillations powerful enough to bend time perception, Miguel slammed the tablet shut. You're talking like this is a lab experiment, but we're standing inside a coffin. These people aren't theories. Silence pressed in again. The preserved faces seemed to listen, their glassy eyes reflecting the beam of Hart's headlamp. Finally, Rahman broke the tension. Let's take external samples, rock, soil, magnetite concentrations. If we can map the anomaly, maybe we'll understand the mechanism. They climbed back out into the thin air. Snow had drifted across the wings, half burying them, but Hart's mind was elsewhere. He could still hear the pilot's final transmission echoing faintly in his ears. Instruments failing. Request assist. At the base of the ridge, Miguel drilled into the black-veined rock. The core sample glittered with flecks of iron oxide, its density far higher than expected. Magnetite contents off the charts, Rahman said, scanning with her handheld unit. And the crystalline structure's unusual. These deposits could generate intense localized fields under stress. Hart's eyes widened. Like tectonic stress, a geological engine powering magnetic oscillations. Still doesn't explain time distortion, Rahman insisted, unless the fields interact with space-time in ways we don't understand. That's exactly what I'm saying, Hart replied. We may be standing on a natural laboratory, an Earth-born singularity. Luis muttered a prayer under his breath. You speak of forbidden things. The discussion was cut short by a sudden vibration under their boots. A low rumble echoed through the ridge. Snow cascaded from the cliffs above, pattering down in sheets. Quake? Miguel shouted. No, Rahman said, checking her instruments. The flux is spiking again. The mountain's field is shifting. Hart felt it then. The same tug as before, stronger, pulling at his chest, his thoughts, even his heartbeat. He gripped a rock for balance, vision blurring as though time itself stuttered around him. For a fraction of a second, he saw something impossible, the plane whole and gleaming, its engines roaring, passengers alive, pilots shouting into radios. Then it flickered, replaced again by the frozen wreck. Hart gasped, staggering back. I saw it, he whispered. I saw it in the moment before it crashed. Rahman steadied him, eyes wide. The anomalies fluctuating. You slipped through it. The mountain growled again, then fell silent. Snow drifted lazily from the cliffs, settling across the plain's frozen skin. Hart's pulse hammered in his ears. The wreck was not just a relic. It was a wound in time, still bleeding across decades, and if they stayed too long, perhaps they too would be trapped in its grip. The experiment. By morning, the ridge was washed in pale light, the mountain towering above like a black monolith against the clouds. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind felt heavy, as though the air itself held its breath. Dr. Elias Hart paced the camp with restless energy. He had barely slept, his mind buzzing with possibilities. Every reading, every flicker of distorted time, every impossible detail inside the wreckage was proof that the mountain was more than legend. It was a natural phenomenon unlike anything else on Earth, and he needed to test it. "We can't just stand here collecting samples like tourists," he said, snapping his notebook shut. "We need an experiment, a controlled exposure to the anomaly." Dr. Asha Raman looked up from her instruments, exhaustion in her eyes. "You're talking about dangerous territory, Elias. This isn't a lab. If we trigger the wrong thing—" "We've already triggered it," Hart interrupted, his voice fierce. "You saw it. The quake. The flicker. This mountain is alive with energy. If we don't understand it, it will swallow us like it swallowed Flight 23. Miguel set down a case of batteries with a thud. "So what's your plan? Walk into the wreck and hope it spits you back out?" Hart ignored the sarcasm. "We set up a controlled field test. A beacon, timed and shielded, exposed to the anomaly. We measure what happens." Luis and Inez exchanged uneasy glances. "The mountain doesn't like to be tested," Inez warned softly. "The mountain doesn't care," Hart snapped, more harshly than he meant. "It's physics, not a spirit." But his hand trembled slightly as he sketched a rough diagram in the snow. A circle representing the wreck, arrows radiating outward. Raman sighed. "Fine. What do you need?" 3 magnetometers, synchronized clocks, and the portable coil generator." They assembled the equipment on a flat patch near the plane. Miguel wired the devices together, muttering under his breath about doomed expeditions. The generator hummed faintly, a low vibration that resonated through the rock. Hart placed a digital clock on the ground near the fuselage, another 20 meters away, and a third at their camp. "If there's temporal distortion, the clocks will drift out of sync." The generator whined louder as he adjusted the coils. The air grew taut, vibrating like a plucked string. Raman studied her readout. "Flux is climbing. Are you sure about this?" Hart's eyes were fixed on the wreck. "We need proof." The moment he activated the sequence, the air shimmered. A faint ripple, like heat rising from asphalt, spread across the snow. The fuselage wavered, its outline flickering between corroded ruin and shining new metal. For an instant, Hart swore he heard voices. Panicked, urgent, overlapping. "Brace for impact! Mayday! Mayday! God help us!" Then silence, as the shimmer collapsed. The clocks beeped. Miguel scrambled to compare them. "The one near the fuselage. It's lagging. By almost 3 minutes." Raman's brow furrowed. 3 minutes. In less than 60 seconds of real time. Hart's breath caught. "Time dilation. Direct evidence." The air crackled, a scent like ozone burning in their nostrils. Luis stepped back, crossing himself. "Enough. Shut it down before it takes us too." But Hart's hand hovered over the controls. His eyes burned with obsession. "If we push the frequency higher, maybe we can glimpse the entire moment of transition. We could watch the crash as it happened." Raman seized his wrist. "Elias, listen to yourself. If you destabilize this field, you won't just watch it, you'll be pulled into it. Do you want to end up like them?" She gestured toward the silent figures in the wreck. Hart's jaw clenched. His whole life had led here. This mountain, this mystery. But her words cut through the fog of obsession, just enough to remind him of the frozen faces staring blindly from the cabin seats. He shut the generator off. The hum faded. The air settled. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Miguel exhaled shakily. "Congratulations. You've proved it's real. Now can we get the hell out of here before we end up in some time bubble?" But Hart shook his head slowly. "We've only scratched the surface. This wasn't an accident. The conditions here, the magnetite veins, the tectonic stresses, they're the engine. The plane didn't just crash. It was pulled into a temporal trap." Raman looked grim. "And if the field shifts again, it could trap us too. As if answering her, the mountain rumbled. Snow trickled down the slope, hissing softly against the fuselage. The message was clear. The anomaly wasn't dormant. It was alive, restless, unpredictable, and it had already noticed them. The truth beneath the mountain. The mountain groaned again that night, a deep bass note that vibrated through their bones. Snow slid from the ridges in pale cascades, and the wreck of Flight 23 gleamed in the moonlight like a silver ghost. No one slept much. Hart sat in his tent with the clock data spread across his lap, tracing patterns in the time drifts. Raman hunched over her spectrometer, recalculating mineral concentrations. Miguel sharpened and resharpened a knife he would never use. The guides prayed quietly, their whispers rising and falling like the pulse of the mountain itself. By dawn, Hart had his answer. He gathered them around the fuselage where the frozen passengers sat in their endless silence. The air felt dense, as though the mountain's breath pressed down upon them. "It isn't magic," Hart said, his voice hoarse but certain. "It's geology. This mountain is a crucible of magnetism and pressure, unlike anything else on Earth. The magnetite veins here are vast, twisted by tectonic stress into oscillating fields. That oscillation bends not just instruments, but space-time itself." Raman listened, skeptical but pale. "So you're saying the mountain generates natural time dilation? Like a localized black hole?" "Not gravity," Hart corrected. "Magnetism. The iron deposits amplify the Earth's field, creating a resonance that interacts with the fabric of time. Flight 23 flew directly into it during a storm. Their instruments failed, they descended too low, and the anomaly swallowed them whole." He turned, gesturing toward the frozen faces in the cabin. "And inside this bubble, time slowed to a crawl. For them, minutes. For us, 40 years. Miguel's jaw tightened. "So they sat here, alive, while the world moved on without them." "No," Hart said softly. "They never knew. To them, the crash was instantaneous. They were preserved in the moment. Dead, but never decayed." The truth hung heavy in the air. The passengers of Flight 23 had not suffered for decades. They had been caught in the mountain's iron grip, preserved as evidence of forces humanity barely understood. Raman rubbed her temples. "If this field shifts again, we could be next. You know that, don't you?" "Yes," Hart admitted. "But now we know why. And maybe, with this data, we can prevent future disappearances. This mountain doesn't have to remain a grave." The ground shuddered beneath them. Snow cracked from the cliffs, tumbling into the valley. The air prickled with static, the hairs on their arms rising. "The field's shifting!" Miguel shouted. "It's destabilizing again!" Hart scrambled for his generator case, but Raman grabbed his arm. "Don't! You can't control it! We need to leave! Now!" But Hart's eyes were fixed on the wreck, his obsession burning like fever. "This is the chance of a lifetime. If I can capture the field at full strength—" "Elias!" Raman's voice cut sharp as ice. "If you stay, you'll end up like them." The mountain groaned louder, a chorus of metal and stone. The fuselage flickered, shimmering between ruin and pristine. For an instant, Hart saw the passengers stir, the woman at the window opening her eyes, the child's hand unclenching from the armrest. Then they froze again, statues in a broken theater. Luis pulled at Hart's shoulder. "The mountain is waking. It doesn't want us here." Hart looked from his notebook to the wreck, torn in two. The answers he had chased all his life were here, within reach. But so was the trap that had claimed an entire plain. Finally, with a trembling hand, he closed the notebook. "All right, we go." They descended in silence, the wind howling around them. The mountain rumbled behind, as though disappointed by their retreat. Hours later, as they stumbled back into base camp, Miguel checked his instruments one last time. The flux had dropped. The clocks ticked in unison again. The anomaly was closing, the mountain returning to its long sleep. Hart stood at the edge of camp, staring back at the looming peak. He knew the wreck would remain there, entombed in ice and silence, until the field shifted again. Perhaps another 40 years, perhaps tomorrow. But now, at least, the truth was no longer buried. Raman joined him, her expression unreadable. "Will you publish this? The world won't believe it." "They'll believe the data," Hart said, though his voice held more doubt than conviction. He tapped the closed notebook against his palm. "And if they don't, the mountain will wait. It always does." The wind rose, carrying with it a faint sound, a burst of static, a ghostly echo of a pilot's voice lost to time. "Control, this is Flight 23. Hart closed his eyes. The mountain had given up its secret, but it had not given up its ghosts.